Good evening, everyone. Hello, my name is Simon Weldon. I'm the Group Chief Executive for the two acute hospitals in Northamptonshire. I'm here tonight to talk to you about hopefully what's a really exciting opportunity for us. I'm joined by my Director of Strategy, Polly Grimmett, and we're going to talk to you hopefully about some of the ways in which we're going to take that opportunity forward tonight. So, Teams has, where I'm talking to you from, has a chat facility, and you can ask us questions. There's a question icon. You can see it in the top right-hand corner there, and it's also the top right-hand corner of your screen. If you have questions, please do let us know. We would love to hear from you and answer them. If we can't answer them, we will find out the answer and put it on our website where you can follow along with the debate as we carry on over the next few months, more of which in a little while. What am I going to do today? Well, we're going to talk about KGH, and the first thing we're going to do is actually show you a video of the site, because although lots of people know bits of the site, maybe you don't know all of it. Then I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about why we need to do this and what the challenge is, and then hopefully get into a little bit about what you think is important to you, because genuinely I believe that hospitals are reflections of their community. They are there to serve their community, and so what's really important to me is that I get to hear what you think, what you want to see in your hospital. This is a building that will have to serve the residents of Kettering, Wellingborough, Corby for the next 30 years, so it's really important we get it right. And then finally, a little bit about how you can be involved going forward. So in a second, I'm going to play you a video of the site. This gives you an idea of some of the issues that we're facing, and then I'll come back and say a little bit more about what challenges the site presents us. So have a look at this video. As the Group Chief Executive for both Kettering and Northampton hospitals, I'd like to thank you for the support you've given and continue to provide during this difficult time. Kettering's already been awarded funding for a new urgent care facility on the site, and has now also been given an opportunity to apply for further funding as part of a project called the Hospital Infrastructure Programme, which will allow us to rebuild a larger proportion of the trust estate. There have been some major developments to the hospital over the years, but some of the areas of the hospital date back to 1890, and we are still running services from those areas in 2020. During the 1960s and 70s, investments were made in the main ward block and Rockingham wing. In the 90s, the current ED and outpatient department were built. In 2000, the treatment centre was built. In 2010, the cath lab and foundation wing were built, housing a state-of-the-art ITU, one of the areas that has seen a huge amount of pressure during the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic. We now have an opportunity to make further improvements to the site, and we want to do this with you and for you. As the people that use our services, you have the best insight, and we want to hear from you. Okay, so you've had a little look at the site, and what I want to do now is spend a couple of moments saying why we need this investment. So, as you can see when you looked at the video, many of our buildings, although some of them are new, many more of them are now in a poor state of repair. In actual fact, some of our buildings are now over 100 years old. And much in common with some of those older hospitals that are around in the NHS, they were never properly planned. So the buildings that we've got have grown up incrementally over time. And the site is hard to find your way around,
and some services are just too far away from each other. And we now have to spend quite a large amount of our money just keeping the lights on, just keeping the buildings safe. And our backlog maintenance bill, in other words, the amount of money it would take to bring all of the site up to current specifications for buildings, is around 100 million. Even if we were able to do all of that, our buildings are no longer fit for purpose. In particular, a great example is the A&E department. Although it opened in 1994, which you may think is not a long time ago, it's a really long time from a hospital point of view. It was only planned for 45,000 attendances. And to give you an example of what pressures we're facing now, in 2019, that same building took 96,696 attendances. And given Northamptonshire's growth, we expect that ED attendances to continue to rise over the number of years ahead. And taking all of that together, we now need to take urgent action, as many of our current buildings won't last many more years at all. So what's the opportunity? Well, we've initially received provisional funding of £46 million to build a new A&E department. We're well on the road with that process, and we've submitted our outline business case. And we hope to make further progress during the remainder of this year on the next stages of planning. But also last year, we were one of the hospitals that were selected by the government to give us initial funding to develop the larger parts of the site. And we were given 350 million to do that. And I'm going to talk about both the urgent care hub and the wider redevelopment of the hospital site now. So for the A&E department, we hope now we've come up with a plan, and the plan obviously now gives us a much more modern A&E department. A&E departments back in 1994 were largely just that. They had doctors and nurses who worked in the hospital in them. Nowadays, of course, they're much more than that. They're community buildings that have GPs in them, have pharmacists in them, have social workers in them. They also have the old emergency department. That will be here for sure, but in order to provide for people's needs, which are much more complex now, we need a wider type of building, and that's what we're going to do. Hopefully in October, we will be able to confirm where the urgent care hub will be located, which will then inform how we do the wider site. And if that's all done on time, we would hope to start building the urgent care hub in winter 2021 and have a new centre opening in the winter of 23-24. But I said also that we're going to redevelop the wider hospital site, and that picture now shows you the challenge. So you can see it says the complexity of transactions involved in the patient experience. Never were words more truly spoken. We've got a population that is both ageing, which is a great success in terms of the care that the NHS has provided, both in the community and in hospitals. We've also got a growing population. We've got a population that needs ever more diverse needs responding to. And you can see that on the left-hand side of that chart. You can also see that we have to respond to people in a huge variety of different ways when they come into hospital. And we believe that that is now by building what we kind of call a campus approach to healthcare. In other words, it's not just about health, it's about social care, it's about the voluntary sector, it's about all the things that hospitals do, and they come together. And then obviously patients go back into the community and hopefully they continue to thrive and have long and happy lives. So building a hospital is really, really complicated. So we're starting on that process, and we're just planning to submit our what's called strategic outline case, our initial ideas, if you like, which we hope to submit in spring 2021. If that case is approved, we'll then start work on more detailed work for our outline business case, where we commit to what we think the design might look like, and then on to a full business case. Do all of that successfully, we would start construction work somewhere around spring 2024. So what will that investment deliver? Well, here you can see some of the ideas. These are not just pictures that are taken from Google. These are real design images that have been drawn from other hospitals, and they're meant to give you an idea of what a hospital of the future can look like. They're drawn from, as I said, real life examples. So they have more single rooms, larger bays in shared ward areas, more day facilities, on-site cafes and restaurants, better heating and ventilation systems, and more natural light. All of those are really important design features in buildings of today. It's not just about that. You now have to think about how you deliver your theatres differently, how you deliver your imaging differently. And you can see a picture of a modern ED department there as well. So we have to think now about a building for the future. So even now, as we design it, we're trying to think ourselves into 5 years in the future when we'll be actually building and setting out our vision for patients. And finally, of course, goes without saying, but there's no such thing as a hospital if it's not a digital hospital. And the hospital of the future will have to be paperless. It will have to make the very best use of that technology in order to streamline care for patients. So a really exciting opportunity to do great things for the people of our patch. And we want to involve you in those conversations. And that conversation really starts today. So we started already to ask people, these are some of the things that our staff and some early conversations that we've had when we've gone out and talked to people. And you can see they range from better access to public transport to well-designed inspirational patient spaces. People don't just want a hospital to be a box in which you come and you're in a cramped space. They want to feel that this is a space that can genuinely enhance the healing environment. So we want to hear from you in this conversation, and that's the purpose of this conversation tonight. It's all about what you think. So on that, I'm really interested to hear from you about what is most important for us to include in the redevelopment. We won't be able to include everything. We've got a finite cash envelope, and that will give us a limit to what we can do. But therefore, it becomes really important for us to hear from everybody about what is important to include and what facilities do patients and visitors most want to see. All of us have been, are, or will be patients. And if you were a patient, or if a member of your family or a loved one was a patient, what would you want to see? And then finally, what improvements would make the biggest difference for you? I've heard of lots of things, from charging points for electric cars in a new car park, right through to cafe and canteen facilities and everything in between. There is no wrong answer at this stage, no wrong answer at all. It's more important that we get opinions out in the open. We will have to make some choices, but at the moment, what we're trying to do is to collect as many ideas as we possibly can. So I'm going to pause there and hopefully take some of your questions. But just before I do that, we want to not only hear from you tonight, we also want to hear from you on an ongoing basis. The whole point of I've said about this is that it is just what I've said, a conversation. So what do you want to be involved in? If you want to join our public reference group, please let us know. If you want to join our mailing list, please email that very complicated email on the bottom there, and we will keep you posted. And we will also undertake to come back to you. I'm talking at a very high level at this moment in time, very early stage. There is still masses of opportunity for you to be involved and help us shape this. So I'll stop there and be very interested in your thoughts on those 3 questions and anything else you would care to ask me. Thank you very much.
So we have a very good question about linked to accessibility, a number of questions linked to accessibility. One is about actually making sure that the site is accessible for patients and staff. The other that is linked to that is about enough car parking, and from there, wayfinding and signage around the hospital.
On the last first, on wayfinding and signage, this is one of the things I get to hear about quite a lot, actually. In part, of course, why do I get to hear about it? Well, because people find navigating around our site really difficult. because the buildings, as you saw from the video, are quite higgledy-piggledy. They're all over the place. There isn't a design ethos or principle that underpins them, and therefore it makes it very difficult for people to find their way around the hospitals. Modern hospitals, of course, are designed much more in an integrated way. So typically, all of the emergency care facilities are together, all of the outpatient facilities are together. Makes it much easier to navigate instinctively. But as we design the site, I've already said this, the wayfinding is not just for me to come to all of you and say, this is how we should do it. The wayfinding is also something that I'm hoping that people will help volunteer to contribute in and help us develop the right ways of doing it. And wayfinding isn't just about putting up a bunch of signs to say, go from here to here, because obviously there's a huge variety of accessibility needs that we need to take account of. People have different needs. Some people may be partially sighted. Some people may have mobility issues. Some people may find it difficult to remember where they're going. We've got to design the site to take account of all of those different needs, which is why we will spend quite a lot of time thinking about wayfinding. It sounds at one level like a really small issue, but in actual fact, of course, it becomes a really big issue when you think about it seriously. On car parking, which is another perennial that I hear lots about, well, I'm hoping the hospital of the future won't look like the hospital of today in terms of car parks. The biggest users of our car parks, by far and away the thing that causes most congestion at the moment, are our outpatient appointments. Traditionally, we've done a huge amount of our outpatients face-to-face, and I don't think that's where we will be in the next 5 to 10 years. I think much more of it will move either to environments local, outside the hospital, local to local communities, or it will move online and it will be virtual. And if we can do that, then I think we can manage the demand that we would expect to see. We shouldn't be doing routine check-in outpatients on site, and that will make a big difference in terms of our how sustainable the car parking is that we need on site. And finally, I should just say on that, hospitals, we haven't really in the NHS been building hospitals for a while. The last of the old new builds, so to speak, were done about 10 years ago. And since that time, obviously, the sustainability agenda has come into view. And we also really do need to think about how do we make our transport plan not only easy for the hospital to get to, but more sustainable, because we owe it to the next generation to leave a sustainable hospital in terms of its environment.
Next question, Simon, relates to staffing. So the struggles that we have recruiting NHS staff, how are we going to do that, and what's the plan with the hospital rebuilding development?
Staffing is probably the biggest single challenge the NHS faces in global terms. Some of you will know that we have recently formed a group. So the 2 acute hospitals came together in early July. And one of the reasons for doing that was because we believed it would make it more attractive for people to come and work here. I'm hoping that that will be the case. And indeed, I know that our nursing directors, our medical directors are working on those plans that they will now work on together. And hopefully those plans will start to say that hospitals in Kettering and hospitals in Northamptonshire more broadly are a great place to come and work. And you can do that more because when you're larger, you can offer people more diverse working experiences, more diverse educational experiences, and that attracts staff. And frankly, we also know that new buildings make a difference. Staff in the NHS have a choice as to where they work, and it's really important that they are valued not only by how we treat them, but by the buildings that they work in. So I'm also hopeful that these new buildings will give us that opportunity too.
The next question, Simon, relates to better mental health facilities for all ages. It's a developing problem and it'll be in need more across the hospital. So how are we going to address this?
In 2 ways that I'll talk about. The first actually is hospitals now in their physical design can help people who've got dementia or related problems find their way around the hospitals and make them more accessible. So just by the act of physical design, we are not just thinking about what we need to do in terms of what goes where. We're also thinking about the patient experience and how, when a patient walks in, be they a young child or an elder who's got cognitive impairment of one sort or another, how they experience the hospital and how we make it as easy as possible for them to find their way around the hospital. And again, buildings that were built 10, 20 years ago, they didn't have that designed into them. And it's really important that we bring it into our DNA of how we build the new hospital. So that's one way around accessibility. Another is in the spaces where we ask people to stay. So giving people greater bed spaces, having more single rooms, makes the hospital a more restful place for people to be. We know that noisy wards is one of the complaints that people talk to me about the most. And that noise, particularly when you're maybe already distressed with something else, is actually really, really hard to take. And so I'm really keen that we think quite deeply about how do we create respectful spaces for people. And that is something that I think we've got a great opportunity to do in this process.
Next question relates to the existing site and the limitation that we have in terms of space. How are we going to provide care during the rebuild?
So one of the key early questions that we've got to answer, and perhaps I'll turn to Polly in a minute because she's led the work on this, is can we rebuild a site safely and appropriately while we deliver care on it? So the short answer is yes, we can rebuild while we continue to care for people. And in many respects, that's one of the accidents of history that actually deals us a bit of a fortunate hand, because although our site is the very antithesis of feng shui, in actual fact, that gives us more space. We're quite a large site, in actual fact, in terms of the number of square meters we have. It's just that we've never really designed it. And as we start to design it, I think there'll be huge opportunities for us to do as Polly said. Next question.
Next question.
So there's a question about coping with future growth. So it's quite specific in terms of what are the plans for areas such as the mortuary where space is limited. With a larger population, is this included in part of the plans?
Yes. So one of the big things that we have to think about is how does the population change? It's probably one of the most complex parts of the planning that we have to do. So what do we know about that? We know Northamptonshire's population is growing. So in the next 20 years, we know that there'll be a larger elderly population, people over the age of 80. And we also know that there'll be a larger population of families who've got children. So we know that that's going to change the type of hospital that we need to build. On a straightforward basis, if we did nothing else, we would struggle to contain that demand within the footprint that we would have available to us. But we very much work in partnership with a load of other colleagues across Northamptonshire, colleagues in primary care, GPs, colleagues in social care, colleagues who are running mental health services, colleagues who are running community services, and all of them have to help us create a hospital that is sustainable. And that's very much the work that we now are engaged in. So the way in which we make the hospital work for everybody is if we see it as a community facility in which everybody has to play their part. The key thing will be you only come to hospital if you need to, and hopefully over the next number of years we don't have as many people who need to come to hospital as often. And when you come to hospital and you are admitted, we get you out again as quickly as possible. And that was really that diagram I showed as the hospital being in the middle of a patient journey. The patient journey is mostly before it, mostly after it, and we have to make it as straightforward and easy as possible for a patient to navigate through that journey.
So if I may, so apologies to people. I can see in the chat that a few people couldn't hear my response. So I'll just recuperate what I was just saying, which is that we are looking at a variety of different options, talking to our staff about where on the site we can start the rebuild. Although it's quite a congested site, we do have some empty spaces of land, and the idea would be that we would start to build on that empty land. Once we've got a fully operational building, we'll start to move clinical services out of some of our older buildings and into that, to allow us to then knock those buildings down, demolish them and rebuild on that space. So that's, apologies for those that didn't hear that before, but that's what I was saying. And I know that there's been another question about where is the new ED going to be? And that's absolutely part of the same discussions that we're having at the moment, and how it will function through the transition. Absolutely, we will rebuild a whole new urgent care hub, and then we will move our current A&E facilities into that. So the current department will be able to be fully functional until the new building is open.
And we're relatively fortunate in having that flexibility. As I went on to say, in case people didn't hear me as well, we actually have quite a large square meterage on our site, which gives us some flexibility that other sites don't have. So I'm pretty confident. In fact, it was one of the first questions we asked and answered our specialist advisors, our architects. Could we rebuild on the site while we continue to care for patients? And the answer is unequivocally, yes, we can.
Question and a request. It's about, do you envisage all wards having fresh ice water available for the future?
The short answer is yes. I think that's absolutely what we have to be able to do. I showed those pictures of potential patient rooms. So I know that some of the facilities in which we have to care for patients are less than ideal. I know that they are well out of date, and I know that our staff work really hard to provide the very best quality of care they can in often very difficult and trying conditions, and I know we ask our patients to have to live with those accommodations. I can say, you know, we've been visited by a number of ministers, and indeed the Prime Minister, and they all came away with a similar impression that we needed to do better for our patients, and that's why I'm so passionate about the fact that in designing these facilities we do the very best job we can to make it a great experience when you come here and stay, and that would include for me things like fresh water, cold water.
A couple of questions that link to one of the slides that you've shown about the potential layout of rooms is the importance of having single-sex toilets to ensure privacy, dignity and safety. So is there anything more that you'd like to say about that?
Other than to say, well, if I show you the picture, I don't know if I can go back up. I don't think I can. If I that, you know, if I believe in anything, it's making sure that these are the ideas that we have in our heart as we go into this process. Patients rightfully expect now accommodation to be modern, fit for purpose, designed around their needs, and critically, and I know I would want this if I were a patient, giving them the appropriate privacy and dignity for their needs. So it's absolutely in the heart of our thinking. Now, the picture that you can see up here are kind of ideas. They're not necessarily what we will end up with. But what I'm trying to get across here is these are the things that are important to us. So you can see in the top right-hand corner there, that picture shows how do we observe a patient without necessarily disturbing them by walking them in when they're sleeping. How do we make sure that the patient has access to natural light? How do we make sure that the patient has water in their room? How do we make sure that the patient has toilet facilities that are appropriate to their needs? All of these are the things that we need to grapple with. So our architects who provided these pictures with us, they're expert and they're working on quite a few hospital rebuilds at the moment. We're not the only people having this conversation, are helping us think through those facilities. But crucially, of course, the other thing I would say is, look, none of this is yet set in stone. it's your opportunity to help us influence the designs that we eventually go for, and that's what I will be looking for in the conversations that we have.
Next question is around where the new emergency department will be located and how it will function through the transition.
So there will be a hard stop transition. So until the day we move in, the old emergency department will continue to be our primary port of call, because you can't have a halfway house on these sorts of things. We expect in October, as I said in the slides, to make an announcement about where we're going to locate the urgent care hub, and I will come back and talk more about that afterwards. It's a really important part of the process, really important decision. Watch this space, and I will be back to talk about that in due course.
Next question, Simon, is are you sharing some specialties between Kettering and Northampton in the future, or is that still to be decided?
So we already have. So we already know, for example, that today, if you have a stroke, you will get better care, because we made a decision a few years ago that all acute strokes would go to Northampton. And we know that because the clinical outcomes, if you get specialist treatment, are better than if you get general treatment. And if you have a heart attack, you come to Kettering. So we know that there will be models of care where that will apply to other specialties. But crucially, you've heard the key determining factor there, that those decisions will be driven by the clinical outcomes. In other words, we have to be able to tell patients, we have to be able to tell our communities that the choices that we make will continue to benefit them and they will get better treatment as a result. So I would expect us to continue those dialogues, and they will be very much emergent as we go through this next period, because having two hospitals working more closely together in a group model gives us that opportunity. It's a really important opportunity. But all that said, let me be clear, there will still be two emergency departments and the associated facilities in Kettering and in Northampton. That is a really important point that people understand, so that for your emergency care, you can come to the place that you've always come to. It will only be where we have significant advantage by co-location or centralisation that we will make an argument to do so.
And there's a comment here from a parent who spent 14 weeks visiting Skidoo, and they've said that there's a need for better parent facilities for overnight stay.
There are, absolutely. I completely agree with that point. We will be designing, as we go through the process of thinking about what facilities we need, facilities for relatives right across our estate, because it's particularly true for parents that they need access and safe space and good quality space to care for their children, because often when children are admitted to hospital, it's very much about the shared care that's provided, the parents working in partnership with the clinical staff, and that's very much the way of the future. It's a reflection of the age of the buildings that we've got and their physical limitations in terms of what we can do to continually upgrade them. We've reached the end of that process. We can't really do that anymore, that we are in the place that we are. But to be clear, and hopefully again you see the ideas, some of these in this space, the facilities that we design in the future have to be much more accessible, and they have to be accessible for parents too. Okay, with that, I'm going to just finish with how you can stay engaged with us. We are really keen to hear from you. I've really enjoyed the questions that I've been asked tonight. Thank you very much for them. I hope you've got a sense of some of my thinking, some of our thinking, as we go into this process. We will need everyone involved. This is a complicated opportunity, and it's a complicated problem that we have to solve. It's also a huge opportunity that we've got to take advantage of. So do let us know if you are interested. We will be establishing a public reference group. And it can include things like the question I've just answered on what facilities do parents need. You know, they're literally, the list is endless. It's not just what you see there. As I've said, if you want to hear more from us, please join our mailing list, and I will be back out holding further public events as our proposals take shape. I think I've just committed to the first one of those, which is talking about the future of a location of our urgent care hub, which I know people will be very keen to hear about. Thanks so much for joining us this evening, and I wish you a pleasant evening.